Oké, goedemiddag allemaal. Kan iedereen in de koffiekamer ook nog komen? We gaan verder met het middagprogramma. Ben ik zo achterin te verstaan? Want er was wat onduidelijkheid dat het te verstaan was. Na de lunch gaan we verder met onze keynote speaker. Dit keer van de andere kant van de wereld, niet van Singapore, maar uit de United States. En het is een eer, it's an honor for me to introduce Christopher Roussin, who was, he just told me, 5 years ago, a professor at Harvard University in the School of Business, but made a switch to medical healthcare. And he's working there in a sim center at the Boston Children's Hospital and has developed a new method to help us and help the world with all the coming problems with simulation and curriculum development. Because our field is so fast growing and in every center there are coming more and more problems, and people have difficulties to manage all those problems. So there was need for a simple system which everybody can use, and Chris developed such a system, and we'll learn us more about this afternoon, but also in the workshop afterwards. And perhaps you can try everything tomorrow. But before tomorrow, it will also be introduced in China. In the biggest children's hospital in the world, decided to go over to use this system for simulation in their hospital. So Chris, we are all very curious about all those top secret tools. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello. I was sitting right there the whole time. It's very, very good to be here with you all. Thank you to everyone who invited me and who's been hosting me. I've been having a very good time. I don't understand your language, although it's really nice to listen to. So that's a good thing. I am here. I did work for I was a professor at a different business school in Boston. I won't mention it. I don't want to advertise a different university. And I am here to connect with you around problems, and I'm going to use the word problem, but also possibilities and opportunities. And that's really the ultimate tone, is about what we do next and what our opportunities are. And in Boston, we've had opportunities to try some things and to experiment with some things and to implement some systems. So we've learned a lot, and I'll be sharing with you today some of what we've learned. But I will frame some of this as problems, because we know that adults learn best when confronted with problems. It's the science of learning. Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I used to be a singer in a rock band, so I was kind of looking forward to holding that microphone, but some dreams die very early. We have to say this in the United States. There's no strange money flowing around in the background and coming to me. So you're getting me today, but what you're really getting is exposure to my colleagues and I, and I'm part of an amazing, what we call a simulator program. And I just want to say that all of those people are really here with me as I talk with you today, including Peter Weinstock, our executive director, who's a very imaginative man. He's a critical care physician, and he really started up this program in 2001, and he had the imagination to recruit me, a human behaviorist, a team scientist, an organizational behaviorist, to come and work full-time at the simulation program. And to this day, I don't remember exactly how he convinced me to do that. I had a very easy job, and it was kind of a nice career, but here I am, and it's been 5 years, and I love it. It's an amazing team. But you're not just here with that team, you're also here with our larger team at Boston Children's Hospital, because this year we're on track to have about 1,000 simulation meetings, simulation learning moments, course meetings, in order to create, develop, support, execute all those courses. That's not done by the 20 people that we work with in the simulation program. That's done by the 300 plus people in the hospital who are trained simulation faculty of various types. So you're also here with those people. And those people really, they constitute a social network, a professional social network from throughout our hospital. And it's the entire hospital that we work with now. And this group of people really creates amazing connections throughout the hospital. So you're here with them as well. If you have a question for them, I'll do my best to answer it, okay? But I said I'd talk about problems, and specifically we're going to talk about the partnership problem in simulation, as I perceive it. And my PhD was in a business school, and I'm an organizational scientist. And one of the first things I noticed when I came to work in a simulation program is that there's a tremendous partnership problem, meaning that simulation is an entity, and the hospital is an entity. And they can be separate, or at the very least, there can be incomplete understandings between these entities. And those incomplete understandings lead us to have, frankly, incomplete programs, incomplete effect on healthcare. So we have problems with our partnership. And it makes us worry about things like who will fund simulation? Who in this room has ever worried about who will fund simulation? The reason why we worry about who will fund simulation is because we have an incomplete partnership between simulation and the hospital. And so we'll talk about that today. I want to clarify some vocabulary. Something else that I noticed when I came to work for a simulator program was that we say we do simulation. And I'm not sure that we do simulation. Some of us do. The people who create the simulations, the people who work directly with the mannequins, the people who maybe develop VR tools, I think we create focused experiential learning to achieve focused outcomes and objectives. You don't have to believe that, but I want you to know that I believe that. And that's how I look at my job. And I don't describe myself as a simulationist. I work for a simulation program. What do? We solve problems by creating experiential learning where it needs to be created. Just so that you know how I look at things. And my belief is that this whole industry is misnamed. I don't think it should be called simulation. Simulation is a set of tools that we use to create experiential learning. I also don't love the term adult learning. I think when Knowles created that, we knew a lot less about the way that kids learn. And when does a child become an adult, and when does that learning process kick in? I also have problems with that terminology. I mean, in a good way. I think we should develop these concepts together. So anyway, I'm trained in the other OB. When I came to healthcare in the United States, people said, "What's your training?" I said, OB. And they thought I meant obstetrics. I said, no, it's organizational behavior. This seriously happened. It happened in conversations. So I started saying, it's the other OB. But let's start to frame this partnership problem using my science. So we like to ask questions in organizational studies and science. How do we organize? We fundamentally look at organizations and we look at how we organize to do our work. And we say, how do we learn? In this organization, how do we learn? What are our learning processes? What do we do to create learning? And then very naturally, and a question that's really important to all of us, is how do we organize to learn? Now, how should we organize to learn? We need to have strong opinions about this. Because after all, most of us in this room endeavor every day to organize to create learning, to accomplish something. I want you to join me in my vocabulary, the vocabulary of my field, of my science. And we have a big problem with the way that we organize to learn because we have unfilled developmental gaps in healthcare. We have unfilled performance gaps in healthcare. We only address part of the problem with simulation. So we're not organizing to learn correctly, or at least we need to improve. So let's take these one at a time. How do we organize? Well, this starts with why do we organize? I work at Boston Children's Hospital, and we're a very well-known children's hospital, which that comes with it a lot of pressure. We have to be good. I'm not sure we're the best at everything like people say that we are. I think we're a very flawed place. I think we work really, really hard as an organization to try to provide amazing care to our patients. And that's why we organize. As we organize, we develop systems and processes, ways of working. We also develop environments, and they look like this. You know these environments. When I arrived in healthcare and I started to take tours of our ICUs and looking around, this blew my mind. I thought about the cognition involved in working in this environment, and I said, wow, how can people make good decisions? There are just so many machines and so many wires, and look at that tiny thing in the middle. That's actually the patient, that tiny thing in the middle. So as we organize, and as we get better, and as we bring technology to our care, we get really complex. It's fundamentally interesting. Here's a team at work. This is in simulation. We call this Zone 3 simulation. I'm going to teach you about that terminology. Zone 3 simulation is very similar to reality, and the reason why we have these simulations is to diagnose, to discover, to uncover the challenges that we have inherent in our work together. And once we uncover those challenges, we describe them, we share those descriptions together, and then we innovate solutions together. So this is Zone 3 simulation happening. It's happening in the real patient care space, because for this particular program, we all agreed that it needed to. That's a simulation. It's a pretty remarkable looking simulation. But there's some interesting things happening here. For example, this team can't see one another as they work. Somebody's getting a call. And there are distractions in our environments, right? Thank you, Mary, for doing that, because it's really true. The noises, if I could give you the full noise of this environment to go along with it, this is interventional radiology. And there's lots of noise, there's lots of screens, there's some incredible people doing incredible work, but they can't see one another. These folks are looking at the screen. The patient's underneath that giant thing. I'm not a clinician, excuse me. That's the anesthesia team. You have technicians standing behind the screens and all around the room that are part of the team. People can't see one another's nonverbal body language. It's just a really suboptimal teamwork environment. It may be optimized for technology, but it's totally suboptimal for teamwork, for communication. So of course, this team has challenges. This team has patient safety challenges. This team has resiliency challenges because of some of these barriers that have been created out of the complexity of its work. You might say out of necessity, because in our hospital, we bring the best technology to our patient care. We just do. Okay, well, that means the team's not looking at one another. Now we need to rehearse. We need lots of training. We may need to understand our challenges, and then once we understand our challenges and we design great systems, now we need to practice them. And what I'm starting to get at is the absolute necessity of training. Just one picture. I said I took the videos out of my presentation so it wouldn't go too long, but this one picture we could do 30 minutes on, no problem. So how do we learn? Well, I'll do this quickly because you know all this. We learn best when we are confronted with problems and experiences that are practical to us. And here's a great one. In our hospital, when surgical residents in orthopedic surgery were applying and removing casts, 4% of patients were getting burns from the cast saw. 4%. And that seemed like a lot when residents were doing this. So a really smart, really practical orthopedic surgeon who's sim trained started up what we call a Zone 1 training program, a skills development program, to teach residents how to better use the cast saw such that less heat was created and casts could be removed without burns. And the post measurement is 1% burns. It's actually less than 1%. And that's extremely significant. And that's been sustained, and the program is very sustainable, and there are some other skills taught as well. But we know that when it's time to learn, we learn through doing. So look at all these stations, and people get to do it. And there are instructors moving around the room and giving lots of timely feedback right in the moment, correcting people's technique. We know that people learn, this is a professional actor, and this is a behavioral event involving security in the hospital, involving the behavioral response code team, we call it, involving the clinicians who are with the patient to start with. We know that people learn best when they interact, like we said, with challenging experiences. If they need to develop as a team, they need to all be there to discuss openly and share ideas about their shared challenges and their shared perspectives, and perspectives that they don't share that are actually totally different of the same moment. We also know people learn better when they get a chance to reflect in a structured way. We often call that debriefing. I also think that's a misnomer. I think that's the wrong name for it a lot of the time, because a debriefing fundamentally has to be matched to a briefing. It's not called a pre-briefing, it's called a briefing. And so you have a briefing and a debriefing. That's where that comes from. The briefing is where you say, here's what we're focusing on today, in today's mission, in today's teamwork. And the debriefing is where you say, we talked exactly about what we were focusing on. Now we're going to talk about how we did related to those things. But anyway, we learn best when we're talking, when we're processing, when we're sharing ideas, when we're reflecting. And even better if we get a chance to do this twice. We get two scenarios, the way that we simulation people talk about it. Okay, we know that works for learning. Sometimes we learn about our environments. Here's an example of a hospital floor design and a bunch of room designs that were actually created out of paper, cardboard, where we brought in real machines, real clinicians, had them simulate emergencies in a proposed building design, and then recorded and learned what was working in that new design and what was not working so that we could redesign the building before the building was built. So that's another way of learning. But how should we organize to learn? And I don't mean organize to learn in one course. I mean, how should the whole thing happen? It's a daunting question. Let's talk about it. So I'll propose that simulation programs have to organize to learn and also solve this partnership problem by doing the following. First, being empathetic and problem-focused. Building partnerships through understandings. Second, being really, really precise with curriculum development to meet objectives and create intended outcomes. Third, differentiating between instructors and facilitators for very specific reasons. Those are not the same word. An instructor teaches something. A facilitator makes something that's difficult easier. Guides something. It's useful that those words are different, although we tend to use them interchangeably. Optimizing learning location. We have simulation centers. Simulations can take place in real patient care spaces. We also have what we call simulation nodes, which means it's a simulation dedicated space, but it's very close to the patient care spaces. We saw one today. It was really nice. Okay? And finally, measuring values so that you know, is it working, is it not working, should we change it? Okay, so that brings us to, and we'll explore each of those. That brings us to, I don't know, a guiding statement for us. A mission statement that's really, really simple and can guide our behavior. We partner to create essential learning at the point of greatest impact. That's our mission, put in short terms. And it says something about what we do. We partner to create essential learning. The word essential means absolutely necessary. At the point of greatest impact. That says something about where it happens, the place where it will have the greatest effect, and that says something about when it happens, the time at which it will have the greatest effect. And if we use this as a guiding statement, we can compare this statement against everything that we do to see if it's fitting this definition. Okay, and in what domains? So I said we have a partnership problem. How do we partner with leadership? Well, by doing things that to them seem absolutely essential. In optimal ways. And across these domains, we've realized that our work is across many different domains. And you could think of these as types of simulation. You could think of these as levels of simulation, but for the moment, let's just think of them as types. We have simulation, experiential learning, that helps people develop skills and master skills, or at least move towards skill mastery, right? And we can even assess that sometimes in simulation. And that's really foundational skill building. We also help people learn how to behave in situations and to optimally handle situations. And we call all of that in this model here, that's our first level of simulation. And many sim programs, that's the level that they concentrate on. And that makes a lot of sense. That's a really valuable level. We also use simulation to test and develop environments. I showed you one example of that. So before a building is built, before a room is designed, before a new machine is purchased, ideally, or at the very least before patients come in contact with a new machine or a new process, you simulate first, validate it, sign it off, and now patients can come in. Okay, and this can become a very standard way to think about opening up a new room, opening up a new machine, opening up a new building, designing a new building. We do that. Complex team training and development. Training is when you have a way of doing things and you train people to do things that way. In a complex team, I don't know, teams where doctors and nurses work together, that already seems pretty complex to me because of the many differences between doctors and nurses. But now you add in other types of professionals, gets even more complex. Now you make it across departments or across specialties, that gets even more complex. Now it's a transfer between two different teams, facilities, more complexity. So sometimes you need to understand it and develop it, and sometimes you have your system and you need to train around it. That's that level 3, okay? Level 4 is actually not about simulation, it's about experiential learning. It's about learning through the experience of your everyday work and having tools in place such that you can structure the learning. For example, having great conversations after patient care, we often call them debriefings, such that people are continuously learning and supported in that learning, and it feels good, okay? And then the top level is having ways of simulating single patient care. For example, we do a fair amount of taking imaging and 3D printing patient anatomy and bringing those models to surgical teams such that the teams can practice the surgery, can plan with one another actually holding a model, can explain things to a family holding a model. And it's all patient specific and it's simulation. But everyone gets to learn through the experience of holding this model and actually seeing what they're going to do, maybe even practicing it. All of this is made possible by having, frankly, great relationships with people, active relationships, active understandings, psychological safety by treating one another well as we do this, and by making these conversations safe. People don't love to talk about their problems. It's a big part of the partnership problem. If we go to a department leader and say, hey, what are all your problems? What are all the ways that you feel vulnerable and weak? They're not like, great, let's talk about it. It takes a while. You really need to build trust and then start to build those understandings. And you can. What that does when you have those relationships is it gives you a constant flow of information about what's important in the moment. Even better, if they're not giving it to you, they're giving it to themselves through the people that are from there that are trained in simulation. So their own people are developing their own programs, all right? Now we're talking about a pretty perfect exchange of information, the development of the right program, and hopefully affecting outcomes as hoped for. This is why almost all of our simulation programs, 90-something% of them, are developed not by me, guy who works in the simulation program, but by the people who need the programs. They become part of simulation. We need tools and processes to help people write down these gaps that we were just describing, to write down these problems that we were just describing. We don't lead with a scenario. We don't say, wouldn't it be great if we could simulate septic shock? It'd be amazing. People run into the room, patients got septic shock, everybody's got to do something. We never start there. We start with, what's the problem? Okay, what's the risk associated with the problem? And let's put that problem in terms of a developmental gap. Something people need to learn, whether it's individuals or teams or both. Now let's talk about the risk associated with that problem. Now let's develop learning objectives. We still have not developed a scenario. I mean, it's implied, but we haven't developed it yet. We give people a tool to write down all these gaps so that they have it all for themselves and for us. Only then do we come up with clever curriculum. And the mannequin gets to bleed and all that stuff. Okay? And for those who are coming to the workshop, we'll talk about that developmental map. I mentioned being precise with curriculum. All curriculum is not the same, and it can become really awkward when you try to accomplish multiple things in one course. All right? We talk about single loop and double loop learning. Who's familiar with single loop and double loop learning? Be honest. Okay, good. So not much familiarity. Single loop learning is when you're trying to master an existing approach. You know how to intubate. You're teaching people how to intubate. So now we need an instructor in simulation, an instructor who's a master of how to intubate. And that instructor is in that room to transfer that knowledge and that technique to the learners. That's single loop learning. Double loop learning is when you're not talking about how to master an existing approach, but you're actually trying to understand the fundamental foundational assumptions and values and norms that guide the things that you do in that context. So, for example, is it assumed that a physician has to be the leader of a resuscitation? Is that a fundamental assumption that you may have? Yes, you may have that as a fundamental assumption. Is that the correct assumption? Maybe not. But that's an example of something that is an assumption. And you may have simulation-based programs entirely dedicated to exploring whether that's the right assumption or not. And if you were to rethink that assumption, what that might allow you to do. We call that sort of simulation zone 3 simulation because it's intended to create double loop learning. It's intended to question our assumptions, question our values such that we can both share our understandings and develop new systems with better assumptions that are more appropriate to what we need. Okay? That one's accomplished by a facilitator and the people who are gathered around. Single loop learning is accomplished by an instructor. We're starting to see that difference. Here's the zones tool. It's really too much to look at right now. But the idea is that we have different ways of learning depending upon the learners and the learning objectives. And we have kind of dials we can turn to change the learning experience and to optimize. Okay? Don't worry. I wrote a paper with Peter Weinstock that describes this very thing, and it's intended to be really easy to read and very practical to use. But I mentioned it's about learners and goals. We can change those dials to change the learning context. We can choose our debriefing and teaching method. Here are some names of examples. Let's go further into that. So Zone 0 simulation is automated skill building experiences, automated feedback. So when I see these VR tools, these serious games that were just on display, those were really exciting Zone 0 tools to me. And they were really exciting. I love that. Incredible talent on display. That's Zone 0. So giving people an opportunity to practice and develop skills on their own. You don't need an instructor present. This is such a compelling concept. Zone 1 is what we think of often as traditional teaching and learning. It's when the instructor is right there with you and you are learning through an experience and you're getting feedback immediately, hopefully really respectfully, hopefully using what we call adult learning principles. Okay. Zone 2 is acute situational training, rehearsal, practice, mastery. So it's not about foundational skill sets in isolation, it's about packaged skill sets applied to situations. We often call these mock codes. When a team in professional sports is practicing a particular moment in a game that could happen, that's zone 2. Like a corner kick. Am I speaking to my audience here? You all tend to know what a corner kick is. In the United States, only some people know what a corner kick is. A corner kick is a situation. It's a zone 2 situation. Okay, it packages together multiple skills like a header. That's what you call it when you hit it with a head here, right? Okay. Kicking the ball in the right location. You would teach all those in zone 1. You package them together to practice a corner kick. That's zone 2. Okay? There are lots of acute situations in healthcare. You know them all too well. Facilitated team and system development, that's zone 3 if it's simulation. Facilitated team and system development, that's zone 4 if it's real life. We call real life zone 4 because we're nerds. Okay? But we're also comparing it to zone 3, which is our way of training and simulation close to real life. 5 minutes. I thought you had a question and I thought you were questioning the assumptions of this session by asking a question. That excited me. Okay, so what the zones do is they describe an essential learning progression. I'm going to propose that right now. Essential means absolutely necessary. I'm proposing that it's absolutely necessary that in all of our areas of our work in healthcare, we first build skills, then we learn to apply skills to situations, and then we have systems of continuous development. Otherwise known as zones 0 and 1, zone 2, and zones 3 and 4. And this is essential. And in areas where we don't have one of these pieces in place, there's a learning gap, there's a developmental gap. Would a football team ever take the field if they had not rehearsed their corner kicks? They would not. Would the coach allow that? Never. And in our industry, we're always playing the game. We're always playing the game, and we do not have much training and rehearsal built in. Again, to reiterate, instructors teach these. Facilitators guide these. Different skill sets. So, of course, we need different faculty development for those two groups of people. Instructors learn how to teach using simulation and experience, create safe environments and teach. Facilitators learn how to guide discovery, diagnosis of challenges, and the development of solutions and next actions. So that's what our faculty development accomplishes, those things for those people. And not everyone needs to do both. Some people are incredibly gifted at teaching clinical skills using simulation. Let them be, that's great. All right, some people want to do both. Simzones, it's just, as you're starting to see, it creates simplicity out of what can sometimes feel like chaos and difficulty. And we developed this for use in our own program, but it's now being adopted in many different places. In fact, I learned about a few this week that I didn't know about, including in New Zealand, including in South America, in Barcelona, Spain, where we have a very mature relationship and where I'm going right after this trip. And in India, most recently, to roll out countrywide healthcare initiatives for children. And I think the simplicity is what people like and the power of that. what haven't we mentioned yet? Where to locate courses. Do you locate courses in your center? Do you locate courses in real patient care spaces? Do you locate courses elsewhere? Well, we go back to that guiding statement, where to locate them, at the point of greatest impact. If that team is doing zone 3 and they're trying to understand their challenges, and part of that team's fundamental work is running into the hallway or down the hallway to go get equipment, then you probably need to have that simulation. It's essential that you have it in the real patient care space. And for example, our trauma development programs almost always, 95% of the time, happen in the real trauma room for that reason, because there's so many challenges that happen in the hallway and in other rooms getting things to bring to the trauma room. That's just one example. We love to have courses in our center because it's easier. It's more convenient. But it's not necessarily the point of greatest impact. Okay? When do you build metrics into courses? How do we understand if our courses are working? We can give people a survey to ask them if they like the course. We can assess people's skills as they're leaving the course. That's all really, really good. But how do we know if the course is affecting real outcomes? We recommend building those. We're starting to be really disciplined about this. We recommend building them in. When you identified a performance gap, there were metrics implied there. Cast saw burns. All right? So do that before you even make your learning objectives. Now your learning objectives are intended to affect a metric, or at least several metrics. Then you select a zone. Then you design a great course. Okay? Back to the partnership problem. Maybe we have a slightly different understanding of it now. A little more visibility into it, some new vocabulary. We can solve this problem. Who funds simulation? The answer is the people that find the service to be essential. And that's how we've made progress in our hospital. We've made our services essential to the people who need them. They describe the services as essential because they have designed them. We helped them understand what was possible through simulation. And then funding is much, much, much easier because it's essential rehearsal. Would your football team give up its practice time? No way. It's essential. It's the same in healthcare. So we need to become essential. We need to become essential by deepening our partnerships. All right? That's our mission. We want to provide essential impact to support your essential profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience?
Only essential questions, please.
Marlene.
Hi, Christopher. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was really intrigued by the pyramid you showed. I love pyramids.
Good.
And you mentioned something about patient-specific training at the top.
Yeah.
So is that also part of the essential learning, according to you?
So if something having to do with a particular patient's care is very complex, and the quality of that care would be significantly improved by the creation of that tool or that model, then it becomes essential. Okay, so we had a patient, is it encephalocele? Is that the right term for it? We had a patient who, a large part of this patient's brain was growing outside of their head. It was actually about this long compared to their body. And we took the imaging from that patient and created a model of the patient's skull and also the brain tissue growing out, and helped this multidisciplinary surgical team actually hold the model. They created something like 5 different models. And they actually practiced the surgery, practiced the cuts they were going to make, practiced the changes they were going to make, and brought those models, used them to communicate with the family, and actually brought those models into the operating room, and they had them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they represented the different stages of the surgery. For that complex moment, those models were essential in the minds of the team. So that's an idea of, that's extreme complexity, but that's an idea of why you would leverage such tools to create better outcomes when there's so much complexity. So do you need a 3D model for every surgery? That's part of what you're asking, I think.
No.
I think the answer is probably no. Some surgeries are very routine. If the imaging is giving you everything you need as a surgical team, if you don't want to wait for a model, if that's not practical, then that's not essential. So you can start to create these guidelines.
Is it more for simulation or for learning?
So if we think about, in this case, it was the team learning about good decision making for that surgery, which was about to happen. So sometimes the learning is going to affect something that's very patient specific that's right about to happen now. And sometimes it's learning that's broader and can guide, many different things that you're doing. There's different learning contexts, I think. Yeah. So that's part of what we think about at the top of that pyramid. Is it essential? Should we spend all this money, this effort to rally around one patient's care? Recently, we've negotiated with the insurance companies such that this is being paid for by the insurance company. If a certain level of essential is met, the insurance company is actually paying for the creation of that model. That's a big, big change. And Peter Weinstock and the team accomplished that.
Thank you. Some more.
Because you've shown the angio switch in which I'm working all day. I'm sure you've done it on purpose. But so I am working in that zone 3 environment that you were showing, the picture that you can talk about for like 30 minutes.
Yes, yes.
And so my question to you is very simple. How should we then, because I'm a surgeon, I'm one of those nerds training in there,
Yes.
with my back towards the team who's behind me.
Yeah.
So should we then mainly focus on communication, because it's not about the technical aspects, and how do we do that?
So what we do, thank you for that question. These are both great questions. What we do in Zone 3 simulation, Zone 3 simulation exists for diagnosis of complex team issues, for example. So something I might theorize is that a good idea would be to get your whole team into a training environment, Zone 3, just like that one, and have you do your work, and then stop after a while and go talk about it. And in that conversation, to identify the challenges that the team experiences through the eyes of the entire team, not just the surgeons, all the different folks in the room. Start to understand those across the team, and then, only then, we can start to design solutions and next actions. That's the benefit of Zone 3 simulation, is that it's diagnostic. It helps us understand these difficult things. So my answer to you is, you'll probably end up working on different ways of communicating and different ways of creating understanding in that room, such that you can organize better to take care of the patient when you need to. And Zone 3 simulation is a great way to do that. Yeah.
Some more. I have a question.
Yes, yes.
I read in your article that only 6 or 7% of the sim time is being performed in zone 0, if I'm
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Would it be possible to overlap some of the zones, like get auto feedback in zone 4 and 5? Or is that something you won't see happen?
Well, to address the first thing, we never overlap zones. You should know how dangerous that is. No, I'm kidding. I was treating zones as like way more serious than they should be. Of course, you can play around with things, right, in general, and you should keep an open mind. But your first question's a really interesting one, because you said, yeah, only 6% is zone 0 right now. But look at what's being developed for automatic practicing tools, including the examples we saw today. That's going to grow tremendously. And I think we're all assuming that that will be a huge growth area for learning in healthcare. But one of the presenters actually noted that a lot of these projects are happening and then they're failing and money's being wasted and people are getting discouraged. So I think we need to understand problems, understand kind of learning gaps and performance gaps, build zone 0 tools, for example, VR tools, to specifically meet learning objectives that solve problems, and to have sponsors for these development projects. And once we do that, I think the percentage that is zone 0 is going to go way, way, way up, such that a lot of very productive activity can happen when people are by themselves practicing. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question I didn't totally understand, so we could go back to it if you want.
Well, I think it's part of the first question.
Yeah.
Like, can you use auto feedback, which is done in zone 1, in zone 5? Like, if you train with a team and with professionals, then you get your own individual feedback just from metrics, really measurements, instead of opinions from someone else.
There's not currently a zone 5, but you may be referring to the top of that pyramid there. And zone 4 is using real patient care moments and to create learning. Is there lots of potential for automatic feedback? I do think so. I actually heard there's a company that like has a product that automatically scores team behavior in a video that's been captured from real patient care. Does anybody know anything about that? Yes, you're the one who told me. And you know, Isabel, I heard you, but I didn't know exactly how this was going to happen, and I was very curious about it. So, you know, there are some companies trying to do very complex things in an automated way. I'm a little bit skeptical in this moment, but for the future, I think it's exciting with, you know, I don't know, advanced artificial intelligence-y kind of ways of evaluating video and behavior. Yeah.
I can see that happen.
Zone 0 is going to grow,
Cool.
no doubt.
Thank you so much. One warm applause again for Christopher for his talk.
Thank you.
If there are still some questions who wouldn't put up yet, please go to his workshop. He'll be right now here at this place, and otherwise go to the workshop where you signed up for. Thank you so much.